All right. Welcome back to the Copywriters Podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, and a very special guest. And I hope I didn't ruin the surprise.
How could you have? You haven't said his name yet, but I will. Kyle Milligan is a successful copywriter with a very unusual view of the world. Lucky for us, it's a way of seeing things that helps him create copy that makes a lot of money. And let's see if what you hear from him today will do the same thing for you. Kyle is a staff copywriter right now for Agora Financial in Baltimore, and he won a coveted award for the performance of his copy. It looks like this giant gold record. It's almost larger than a human. This award he won for bringing in 51,000 new names to the company in 2018. Now, if you think, oh, well, that's easy because Agora is a giant company and they've got lots of resources and all they do is wave their magic wand. They could take a piece of dog crap and turn it into 51. No, wrong. Exactly the opposite. It's very competitive. And take it from me, it's not easy. It takes skill, perseverance, and something special I have not yet been able to identify. But Kyle has identified something unique and very valuable that I've heard him talk about once, but I've never heard about from anyone else. The 4 emotions of copywriting. He's agreed to talk about them today and a few other things on the Copywriters podcast. And for that, I'd like to thank you in advance, Kyle. I also thought you might like to know that first, I've agreed to talk about this. Copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear on this podcast. And most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims and if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries like health, finance, business opportunity, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using your copy. My larger clients do this all the time, and I do believe that Kyle's copy is subject to a legal review. So that was an additional hurdle it had to cross before he brought in the 51K names. Kyle, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thanks very much for having me on and the very awesome intro.
You're welcome. So you have taken research, in my estimation, to a new level. I mean, most copywriters will research a particular sales letter or VSL or script or ad. You researched copywriting itself. Yes?
I think that's kind of a good way to describe it. And I have some reasons. This might be an open loop. I'm going to take notes here. But
sure.
I think I have a reason in my story. If we get into my story at all, we'll play into that in a big way about why I kind of almost went a little over the top with it. So
right.
definitely want to, but yeah, I think that it's difficult because like perfection is the enemy of the good, but at the same time, enough is really not enough. I think is a good way to kind of think of it too. So that's a very long, convoluted answer to something I think we'll get into in the whole story.
You know, most people go to copywriting, get into copywriting, and they will turn to me or John Carlton or Dan Kennedy or the Agora Copy Camp or some of the lesser programs that I won't disparage by mentioning. Or, you know, some of the old masters like Claude Hopkins and Gene Schwartz. But you, maybe you did that. I'm guessing you did that. But you also said, no, I've got to go to first cases. I've got to go to the a priori basic foundation stuff. And as a result, you've come up with the 4 emotions of copywriting, which I know we'll get to, and which I've found an innovation. And I've studied a lot of things. I won't say I've studied everything, but I've seen most of the new stuff that comes down the pike, and this is really different. What is it in you that made you want to get past what everyone else is studying?
I think a lot of it has to do with ignorance. I think a lot of it has to do with, like, in hindsight, it's really easy to say he wanted to go the extra mile. Like, even when we're looking over copy, we sit down and we pontificate about what the writer was trying to do. And the writer's like, oh, I was just trying to write some good copy. I wasn't trying to do all this crazy stuff that you say I'm trying to do. I think I find myself in that position sometimes. So the big story, and I think this is a very important point that I try to make anytime I can, when I have an audience as large as yours or like a platform to make it. My coming into Agora was almost an accident. I heard Joe Schriefer on the Copy Chief radio podcast talking to Kevin Rogers about this free copy camp. I didn't know anything about copywriting. I knew that it existed because I was trying to write novels and sell them, but they weren't selling. And people were like, well, you have to market. And I knew nothing about marketing. Nothing. So I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? And then I hear this word copywriting. So I'm Googling, and then I stumble on this podcast. So there's a lot of folks who come in and it's like, I almost kind of feel like somewhat unworthy at times. Like there are people who dream of making it to Agora and they practice and they hustle and they read and they study. Me, I wanted the free copy camp because I heard that he would pay for us to go to copy camp so I could get free training and they'd pay for it. I was like, oh yeah, now I can sell more of my stuff. So it was a total ignorance sort of thing. Like most of my story can be traced back to this idea that I finally found a label for it. And Stephen Pressfield wrote about it in his book called Do the Work. It's 2 words, stay stupid. Like all of my blessings in life have come from complete ignorance of like not knowing any better. So yeah, so I sent an email to Joe Schriefer.
Let me dignify this thing that you're self-deprecating about, which I appreciate it. But there's a Zen concept called beginner's mind, which is, I think, the mindset of masters. It means you don't look at this from a point of view of I'm an expert, I know everything, but I really don't know. I need to find out the fundamentals. You could look at it that way too. Not trying to change your story, just wanted to give you an additional arrow in your quiver.
Yeah, I'll take it. But yeah, I think that is a good point. I'd say, I need to find out in one word equals curiosity, right? Okay. So we could use that angle. But yeah, so I shoot an email to Joe Schriefer. He doesn't answer. I'm like, hey man, I saw your podcast. I was like, hey, why don't you hire me? And he didn't answer. So I sent a follow-up email and it just said BUMP with a smiley face. Like, hey, I'm still over here waiting for your answer, guy. Like, I didn't really know who he was or what he was about or anything about Agora. I was just like, this dude said he'd give me training. Where's it at? So again, complete ignorance and stupidity. So I get in there and I know I need to learn copywriting. So I read, Adweek Copywriter Handbook by Joseph Sugarman. I read the Boron Letters. I might have read 1 or 2 other books about copywriting. So the first day on the job, I get in and I ask, the question I get so many times, and this is kind of why my whole like platform or YouTube channel and all that stuff always preaches this. I said, well, what book do I need to read next? And so it wasn't my idea. I didn't have this brilliant moment. Like I don't think I've ever come up with anything creative in my life. Someone said it and then I said, oh, that. So Evaldo was my original copy chief. And I said, so what do I need to read next? And he's like, you don't really need to read that stuff. He said, you need to read copy. Okay. So I didn't come up with it.
Okay. That's interesting. You need to read copy. Let me stop right there because that's where you came up with your discovery, which I'll call creative, and I certainly accept that you won't. And the thing about reading copy is it depends on how you read it, right? If you just look at it, I mean, someone was telling me about a very new person who was reading it and saying, oh, I don't like this. Oh, the person's being repetitive. Oh, they're using, blah, blah, blah. You weren't reading it that way. You're reading it with an inquisitive mindset as to what are they doing and why does it work and how does it work? Is that true?
Yeah. So good point. So you talked about like Zen a little bit, and then like let's compare that to this idea of like I'm reading copy. Oh, I don't like this. They're being repetitive. Oh, this is that. The words like I don't like this. It's kind of like applying judgment to what you're reading, right? You're reading it sort of like as a passive consumer of the content.
Right.
So when you're meditating, right, and you're sitting there and you're quiet and you're not doing anything, you're you're seeing thoughts come in. You say, there's a thought, get rid of it. There's a thought, get rid of it. You don't judge it or think about any further besides, here comes a little bubble of a thought. I need to eliminate it because that's what meditating is.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same thing with copy. When I would see those things, so first off, I was in a position where I had a library of, here's all the copy that worked. Like this copy made 7 figures, and here's the list of all the promos that made 7 figures. And so when it came time to read them, it wasn't my place. And again, as a person who doesn't know any better anyway, to judge whether this is good or not. It simply is. So I had like a highlighter, and I remember one of the first things, like I basically read so much that I just read them all. I just kept reading them. And eventually patterns started to emerge. One of the first highlights I ever made, and it was funny because I showed this with Rob Braddock, who's actually doing very well at Wealth Press. They just had a big launch.
I know $1 billion Braddock.
Yeah. So he was the first person I showed this to. And I believe it was an Evaldo promo. I believe it was Weekly Wealth. It was Alan Nuckman's Weekly Paycheck Indicator.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I said, dude, look at this. I had a yellow highlighter. I said, look at this page. And then I flipped the page. You see this page. Flip the page. See this page. And every page had one yellow highlight. And I was like, he just says this one line on every single page. Like there's not a page where this line does not appear. So that can't be an accident. Like I can flip a page and there's the line, almost
Mm-hmm.
like mechanically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, well, what else is happening like that we don't even realize is happening over and over and over again?
So you were seeking out you weren't seeking out patterns. You started to see patterns, and then you said, maybe there are other patterns like this. Is that right?
Yeah, because again, and this is the point I was going to make way back at the beginning. I opened a loop. I didn't know anything about copy, so I felt like I had to like dissect these things and figure out, like how and why are these things working? Like why does writing in this order? Like that's what it is. Like I don't want to put too much emphasis on the creativity of copy because it is kind of a structural, mechanical game in a way.
Right.
And I felt if I could, and I like that too, because that levels the playing field, right? One engineer might be more talented than another engineer, but in general, one mechanic can fix an engine. Another mechanic can also learn to fix or build that engine.
Yeah.
So it makes it so we're all equal. And I think that's very important too, because I know there's like this giant, golden barrier to entry sort of for copywriting and A-listers, and that's that separation. And I think that's kind of like a limiting in belief that's self-imposed on people who don't know to sit down and do what we're talking about, which is like look for the patterns until it becomes second nature. Now, when I'm reading a promo, I can sense like, you gotta mix it up here. Like I'm losing interest. And then I already know from a repertoire of experience, like I know what you should have put here. Like you should have introduced the guru by now. Like, why am I listening to you? Like it's about the pattern. And that comes into this whole thing. I'm running away with this conversation now, but it comes to this language of copywriting is what I decided to label that. So all I'm doing is I'm taking things that are existing in the universe and I'm putting labels on them. I'm just saying that's that and that's that.
Yeah, and that's really good because most people don't do this, and I've sort of looked for patterns myself and done really well with that with copywriting templates, but I was looking for things a lot more structured and traditional. You got right down to the core basics. Let's talk about that. And like I said, for everyone listening or watching, this is unique in my experience. I mean, what is the language of copywriting?
So for me, the only way I could think to, when we write a promo, let's talk about financial copy. I'll tell like a story and I'll bring it back to the language. When you write a promo, it's sort of like the structure of, I got this system. You won't believe it. You punch a button, it spits out a trade or whatever. Like you watch when it enters the buy zone, you place the trade, you cash out. Wow. Now watch again, enters the zone, you place the trade, you cash out. Wow. Okay. So eventually you get to a point where you need to be able to explain this system. There's like two versions of an explanation of a system. What I've labeled the technical explanation and the layman's explanation. And they always go the same way. It's always like, hey, I've got this stochastics and MACD and this heavy analytical algorithm, but you don't need to know all that. Here's all you need to know. Okay, so that's your technical explanation. Then they immediately transition to like, all you need to know is it's a lot like this piece of bubble gum. I chew it, I blow a bubble, I get rich. So they kind of explain it away, some dumb example that, what? That's not how it works. But you can sit at a bar and you can say to the guy next to you, half drunk with one eye open, like, hey, it's as simple as chewing bubble gum. Like, you chew the bubble, you blow it, money explodes. I don't know. It's amazing. So the language of copywriting is sort of a iteration of that. Like, how do I explain this idea that there is a universal law or order or structure to this? Like, when we speak, we don't garble up our words. I can, and if I do, it'll be much more difficult to understand what it is I'm saying. It won't be as pleasant an experience. But we know that the red apple fell, right? And I was able to, the language is good because you can relate to it, just like the bubblegum example. So for instance, if I'm speaking Spanish, you reverse orders, but you still understand it because you're speaking that language. In a past life, I went to school, I got a master's in accounting, and I went down the CPA world, and they have their own language. When they say a word, when they say, accounts receivable, or they say PP&E, property, plant, and equipment, that word comes attached with all these subtle understandings and meanings behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with copywriting. When we say proof, when we say hook, when we say headline, when we say lead. So when Evaldo asked me to submit copy for the job, he said, can you send in a headline and lead? And my response was automatically, yes, I can. But my first action was Google headline and lead.
I don't know if people understand the irony and the way you were walking a tightrope by saying yes and not even knowing what those things were. And then with Evaldo, I mean, nice guy. I love Evaldo, but like isn't he the highest earning copywriter at Agora Financial right now? Some 80 million or something last year.
Yeah, it's not even close. I won't speak to his numbers, but it's a landslide. Like he's basically a company on his own.
Yeah. Okay. So when you just say, yeah, I'll have you a headline and a lead tomorrow, that's sort of like Leonardo da Vinci saying, I'll have you this new invention tomorrow morning.
Yeah, except I wasn't Leonardo. I was like the plumber, like saying, I'll get it, Leonardo, don't worry.
So, he's Leonardo, right?
Yeah. Well, here, I'll tell you what I did. Again, man, I'm not special. So Evaldo said, here's an example of a promo from Agora, and he sent me, I want to say Patriot checks. He said, just write a headline and lead about your favorite book. And so what I did is, my favorite book at the time was this book called Bigger, Leaner, Stronger by Mike Matthews, which was like a fitness guide. And I saw Patriot checks, and here's what it said. I've got this thing that does this. So I said, all right, well, I've got this new bodybuilding system that sheds weight in like whatever days. So I looked at this first line, and he was like, take a look at something, something, something. I was like, okay, well, take a look at this. And then his next line was like, Pete made $1,000. Jeff made $10,000. And Jessica made $1,400 all in 3 days. So I went to the Bigger, Leaner, Stronger website, and I said, okay, well, Mike lost 10 pounds and Jack lost 20 pounds. And again, like I just saw what he did, and I was like, all right, cool, I can do that for this. And it's all 100% original content because I'm talking about weight loss. Like nothing but the structure is duplicated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what got me into Agora Financial.
That's interesting. Yeah, and that is what so many people, it's either they can't or they don't want to or they don't understand. That's a step that a lot of people don't understand. When you're swiping, it's not about, just plugging in a couple different words. It's about stepping back, seeing what the structure is, and then reapplying it to another situation, maybe with enough different words so that it's not even close to being a plagiaristic foul.
Yeah. One time I got caught like a deer in headlights on one of these sort of like calls, and his question, like I wasn't expecting this. I should have been better prepared. He was like, "What's the one thing that drives you nuts in your industry," or something like that. And I was like, I don't know. So I figured out the answer though, or one of like the biggest, like what's the biggest mistake? And I was like, how the hell would I know what the biggest mistake is? Like, I don't know anything. So I was like, okay, here's the biggest mistake I see probably would be people who think copywriting is creative. And it comes back to, the guy sent me what works. Okay. And I've done this before for folks who want to come to the Agora open house. I did the same thing. I gave them the exact same benefits that I had. I said, here is Trump bonus checks, which me and $1 Billion Braddock wrote. I say, here's Trump bonus checks. Look at this promo and then sell me your favorite book. I basically laid it out there for them. And then they'll send me this, emotional driven story into this section, into that section. And then I'm like, no, like I gave you the instructions, right? I said, all you got to do is like, see this, do that, but do it for a book. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake copywriters make is they think that, and I might be wrong about this, I could be wrong. I think the biggest mistake that people make is they think they have to come up with stuff. They think they have to be like super creative and clever. And I think the mistake they make is they do too much. Like this is what works. This is already been proven. And if you read enough copy, you'll see that, oh wait, it worked here, it worked there, and there. And everyone is trying to reinvent the wheel. And it's never like, okay, well, let's try this little thing differently. I just read this book called Made to Stick, which I've read a couple times now, and they gave it to us in Copy Camp. And very, 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 very early on, they tell us about this experiment. There's 3 groups of people who are asked to write an advertisement. One group of people has no instruction. Another group of people had a brainstorming session before writing the advertisement. And the third group were given other ads. The third group outperforms all the other people. And they said, well, what's the lesson to take away from this? He said, are we trying to tell you that being creative is a paint by numbers approach? Well, yes, being creative is a paint by numbers approach. He said, essentially, we are not trying to create new rules. We're trying to create new ideas within the rules. So your content should still fit what works. Your ideas can be unique and special and all that stuff, but they should fit in the skeleton. Like, don't try to create a new organism, right?
Yeah.
You create a person with blue eyes and brown eyes and yellow hair and brown hair, but he's still a person. Still got 2 arms and 2 legs, 10 toes and fingers.
Well, let me throw out a proposition to you about what you're saying. Could it be that the creativity is not inventing a new structure, not inventing a new way to do things, but inventing a new way to do the same thing, a slightly new way that won't be recognizable, that won't be a copyright infringement with the circle C. And that's where the real creativity in copywriting is.
I think you're exactly right. And it goes back to the idea of, instead of trying to, like I say, like whenever they try to do something creative, they never try to do like what you're talking about. Like, hey, what can we tweak about this offer? It's usually like, offers are dead. We're not doing offers like that anymore. Now we're just, we're doing them on trampolines and then throwing them off of buildings.
Why people do that. What I'm talking about is a lot less glamorous and much harder work and more frustrating, because you might have to try 10 different tweaks on an offer till you come up with one that follows the rules and is fresh enough to be different and is intriguing. Would you agree?
Yeah, the biggest mistake, and it's the biggest mistake because it is the most difficult thing for copywriters to do, is less talking, less selling, just straight to the meat, like what it is. And that, what book was it I just read too? It might've been a Stephen Pressfield book. Some French guy, some French engineer or something, said that like the perfection or whatever, beauty or something in engineering is not when you can no longer find new things to add, but when you can no longer find anything else to take away. And I think that speaks volumes for copy.
There's a much cruder copywriting version of that, which is what Joe Carbo called the RCA Principal in The Lazy Man's Way to Riches. He said, build the best radio you can and then keep taking parts out of it until it stops working. Hey, listen, we have run out of time, but would you come back next week? And because I still want to get to those 4 emotions of copywriting.
We didn't even talk about them. Yeah.
I know. What a tease you are. My God, what a copywriter. No, would you? Would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we're out of here, though, I would love if Kyle would share somewhere for the listeners to go and check out more of his work.
Oh, yeah, sure. Great. So the big 4 emotions, which I didn't even really get to go into on this one, I wrote a book called Take Their Money, and that's available at kylethewriter.com/book. But all my stuff is pretty much at kylethewriter.com.
Yeah, and I have that book, and I strongly recommend it. It's really good. And it's unique based on solid research as opposed to unique based on, gee, let me smoke some herb and come up with a really wild idea. It's solid stuff.
Nice. All right. And until next time, actually, you know what? If you want to make sure you catch the next episode, make sure that you're subscribed to the Copywriters podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening at. And you can check out more episodes over at copywriterspodcast.com.
Yeah, can't wait till next week.